Somewhere in Southeast Asia, a teenager just paid for lunch, booked a ride, sent money to his mother, and took out a small loan without ever leaving one app. He didn't think twice about it. That's the part that should unsettle you, because in America, the same 5 actions require 5 different apps, 5 different passwords, and 5 different companies quietly harvesting 5 different slices of your life. We built an entire economy on fragmentation and called it convenience. And somewhere else in the world, a company looked at that fragmentation and asked a very simple, very dangerous question. What if we didn't need any of it? What if one company could become the operating system for a person's entire financial and daily life? Not a feature, not an app, an operating system. Here's the polarizing part. Silicon Valley had every advantage to build this first. The capital, the talent, the infrastructure, and it didn't. It got outbuilt by a region investors barely glance at. And the company that did it is still, right now, trading like the market hasn't figured out what it actually owns. This isn't a story about a stock tip. It's a story about a shift in how technology consolidates power, and why almost nobody watching this video has noticed it happening. By the end of this, you'll understand why the next great platform business might not come from the place you're trained to expect it from. You'll understand why ride-hailing company is one of the most misleading labels ever applied to a business. And you'll understand why the investors paying attention right now are quietly positioning for something the rest of the market hasn't priced in yet. This is the market continuum. Let's start with the trend nobody wants to admit is already reshaping the world. Think about how many apps live on your phone right now. One for rides, one for food, one for banking, one for payments, one for messaging, one for investing. Each one wants your attention separately. Each one stores your data separately. Each one charges you separately. Each one builds loyalty separately. None of them talk to each other. You are the connective tissue holding together a dozen disconnected businesses, and you don't even get paid for the labor of switching between them. Now flip that model. What happens when one company decides to become the connective tissue instead of you? What happens when your rides, your meals, your payments, your savings, your insurance, and your shopping all live inside a single identity? That single identity becomes incredibly hard to leave, not because you're locked in by fear, but because everything just works better together. This is the super app. And it didn't happen in San Francisco. It happened in Southeast Asia, a region where hundreds of millions of people skipped traditional banking entirely and went straight from cash to their phone. No legacy infrastructure to protect. No decades-old banking regulations shaping consumer habits. No entrenched competitors to dismantle first. Just a blank slate and a real problem. An underbanked population that needed financial access, transportation, and commerce solved simultaneously, not sequentially. American tech companies built one thing and did it well. One search engine. One social network, one marketplace. Southeast Asian tech companies didn't have the luxury of narrow focus, so they built breadth instead, and breadth turned out to be the more defensible moat. While the West was arguing about which single app would win a category, one company in Asia quietly decided to win every category at once. Think about what that actually requires. It requires a company willing to operate at a loss in one division so it can subsidize the growth of another. It requires a leadership team comfortable running 8 different businesses under one roof instead of doing one thing exceptionally well. It requires a level of patience most public markets don't reward in the short term because breadth doesn't show up cleanly on a quarterly earnings call the way a single hit product does. Most companies never attempt this, not because they lack the ambition, but because they lack the structural advantage of starting from nothing. An established bank can't easily bolt on ride-hailing. An established ride-hailing app can't easily become a licensed lender overnight, but a company built from the ground up in a region with no legacy systems to protect can design all of it as one connected experience from day one. That's the advantage nobody talks about. Not better technology, not smarter engineers, just a starting point with nothing to defend and everything to build. And it built something most investors still describe with the wrong word. Most people call it a ride-hailing company. That's what it wants you to believe because that's the layer everyone sees first. But peel back that layer and something else is underneath. Peel back ride-hailing and you find food delivery. Peel back food delivery and you find grocery delivery. Peel back grocery delivery and you find a digital wallet processing billions of dollars in transactions. Peel back the wallet and you find lending, real loans issued to real people who banks ignored for decades. Peel back the lending and you find insurance products layered directly into the checkout flow. Peel back the insurance and you find a merchant advertising platform quietly generating some of the highest margins in the entire business. Layer after layer after layer, and at no point does the business stop expanding into the next adjacent need. By the time you reach the bottom, ride-hailing company doesn't describe what you're looking at anymore. You're looking at something closer to a financial ecosystem wearing a transportation company's name tag. This is Grab. And the reason most investors still misjudge it is the same reason most people underestimate anything that grows sideways instead of up. Sideways growth is boring to watch in real time. It doesn't look like a rocket ship. It looks like a company quietly adding one more service, one more region, one more feature. Nothing dramatic enough to make headlines on its own. But step back far enough, and the sideways growth becomes a flywheel. Here's how the flywheel actually works, piece by piece. A ride generates a customer relationship. That customer relationship generates a payment. The payment sits inside a digital wallet. The wallet becomes the default way that customer pays for everything else on the platform. The wallet data becomes the foundation for a lending decision, because the platform now knows a person's income patterns, spending habits, and reliability better than most banks ever could. The loan builds trust and loyalty that a one-time transaction never could. The trust brings the customer to the merchant side of the platform. Restaurants, shops, small businesses that now have access to a built-in customer base. More merchants join because the customers are already there. More customers arrive because the merchant selection keeps expanding. More rides get booked because the same wallet, the same rewards, and the same account already exist. Every piece of the flywheel makes every other piece stronger. The company barely has to spend extra money to make it happen. The system does the compounding on its own. Most businesses have to buy a new customer every time they want to sell a new product. This company doesn't. It already has the customer. It already has the payment method on file. It already knows what that customer buys, how often, and roughly how much they can afford to borrow. So when it launches a new insurance product, it isn't marketing to strangers. It's offering a relevant product to someone who already trusts the platform with their money and their location every single day. That's the quiet advantage that never shows up in a headline. Every new product launched inside the ecosystem starts with a built-in audience, which means the cost of acquiring a new customer for that product is close to zero. Compare that to a standalone insurance company or a standalone lending app, which has to spend heavily on advertising just to get someone to download it and trust it enough to hand over sensitive financial information. This company skips that entire step because the trust was already built somewhere else in the ecosystem, one ride and one meal at a time. This is why the flywheel doesn't just create more revenue. It creates revenue that costs less and less to generate, which is the exact definition of a business getting structurally stronger over time, not just bigger. This is the part most investors completely miss because they're trained to evaluate one line of business at a time. They look at ride-hailing margins and shrug. They look at food delivery margins and shrug again. Taken individually, both businesses look thin, competitive, and unremarkable. But nobody makes money on the ride. The ride is the acquisition cost. The real money shows up 2, 3, 4 layers deeper in the businesses almost nobody is watching. Ride-hailing and food delivery are low-margin, high-volume businesses. They exist to bring people into the ecosystem, not to generate the bulk of the profit. Advertising, lending, and payments are high-margin, high-leverage businesses. They exist to extract value once the customer's already inside. Every new service the company adds doesn't just create new revenue. It improves the margin profile of the entire platform because the expensive part, acquiring the customer, has already been paid for. This is the transition long-term investors actually care about. Not whether the company is growing, but whether the growth is shifting toward the parts of the business that make more money on the exact same customer. And right now, that shift is happening in the numbers, not just the narrative. In the first quarter of 2026, Grab's revenue grew 24% year over year to $955 million, and this was supposed to be the seasonally weakest quarter of the year. Adjusted EBITDA grew even faster, up 46% year over year to $154 million, marking the 17th consecutive quarter of profitability improvement. Monthly transacting users climbed to 52 million people, a base that keeps expanding even as the company becomes more profitable per user, not less. Financial services, the loans, the lending, the wallet, grew loan dispersals 67% year over year, crossing over $1 billion in a single quarter, with the segment targeting a $2 billion loan book by the end of the year, and adjusted EBITDA break-even expected in the second half. Grocery delivery is now growing roughly 1.7 times faster than food delivery, quietly becoming one of the fastest expanding parts of the platform. Management has reaffirmed full-year guidance of $4.04 to $4.10 billion in revenue, alongside adjusted EBITDA guidance of $700 to $720 million, a company that has moved from burning cash to compounding it. None of these numbers alone would make headlines. Together, they describe a company quietly transitioning from growth story to profitable platform, which is exactly the transition that tends to get rewarded once the market finally notices. Keep that transition in mind, because it becomes important again in a moment. Here's where the story gets interesting, because the future isn't a single guaranteed outcome. It's a set of possibilities, and each one carries a different level of likelihood. The first possibility is regional dominance. The company simply continues doing what it's doing, deepening its hold on Southeast Asia, squeezing more high-margin services out of an already captured user base, and letting the flywheel keep compounding without needing to reinvent anything. This is the least exciting outcome to talk about, and probably the most likely one to actually happen. The second possibility is global expansion. The super app model gets exported to other underbanked regions, parts of Africa, Latin America, and South Asia that share the same conditions that made this model work in the first place: young populations, limited legacy banking infrastructure, and rapid smartphone adoption. This is the outcome that would justify a much larger valuation, and it's the one most speculative investors are quietly betting on. The third possibility is consolidation. A larger global technology or financial company decides the fastest way to enter Southeast Asia's digital economy isn't to build a competitor from scratch, it's to acquire the company that already won. This outcome would reward existing shareholders quickly, but it would also end the long-term compounding story before it fully plays out. Which of these is most realistic depends on execution, regulation, and competitive pressure. And that brings us to the part every investor should sit with before getting excited about any of this. Notice something about all three of these outcomes. None of them require the company to invent something entirely new. Regional dominance just means doing more of what's already working, deeper. Global expansion just means copying a proven playbook into a new region with similar conditions. Even consolidation doesn't require reinvention. It just requires someone else recognizing the value of what's already been built. This is different from betting on a company that needs a breakthrough to succeed. This is a company where most of the plausible futures are variations of keep doing this somewhere else at a larger scale, and that's a meaningfully different risk profile than betting on unproven technology or an unproven business model. That doesn't make any of these outcomes certain. It just means the range of realistic outcomes is narrower, and narrower ranges are usually easier to reason about than wide ones. Because this is where Wall Street may be looking at the company the wrong way, and where the story could also fall apart if you ignore the risks. Competition hasn't disappeared. Regional rivals and global players continue fighting for the same wallet share. And price wars in ride-hailing and delivery can compress margins faster than new services can rebuild them. Regulation is a real constraint, not a footnote. Financial services businesses, lending, insurance, digital banking, operate under strict government oversight, and every country the company operates in has its own rulebook, its own licensing requirements, and its own political risk. Fuel price volatility and macroeconomic conditions across Southeast Asia directly affect driver incentives, which directly affect margins. This isn't a company operating in a stable, predictable environment. Execution risk is constant. Managing 8 or more interconnected business lines across multiple countries is exponentially harder than managing one business in one market, and complexity creates more places for something to go wrong. Consumer behavior can shift. Loyalty inside a super app feels durable until a competitor offers a genuinely better price or experience, and switching costs are real but not infinite. None of this means the model is broken. It means the model is ambitious, and ambitious models carry real risk alongside real opportunity. Which is exactly why this isn't a story about certainty, it's a story about probability. There's also a structural risk that gets less attention than it deserves. The more of a customer's financial life a single company controls, the more concentrated the failure risk becomes if something goes wrong at the center. A data breach isn't just a ride-hailing problem anymore. It's a payments problem, a lending problem, and a personal identity problem all at once. A regulatory crackdown in one country isn't isolated to one product line. It can ripple across the wallet, the loans, and the insurance offerings tied to that same license. This is the trade-off baked into every super app model everywhere in the world. The same interconnection that makes the business more profitable also makes it more fragile in the specific places where regulators, hackers, or competitors decide to apply pressure. Understanding this trade-off isn't a reason to dismiss the model. It's a reason to watch how the company manages risk with the same attention you'd give to how it grows revenue, because the two are no longer separate conversations. So why are long-term investors paying attention despite all of that? Because the market has historically struggled to correctly value companies that don't fit into one clean category. A pure ride-hailing company gets valued like a ride-hailing company. Thin margins, intense competition, limited pricing power. A pure fintech company gets valued like a fintech company. Regulatory risk, credit risk, but higher margins. A company that is quietly becoming both, layered on top of a payments network and an advertising business, doesn't fit neatly into either valuation model. And markets are historically slow to re-rate businesses that don't fit the existing spreadsheet. That mismatch between what a business actually is and how the market currently prices it is where long-term opportunity tends to live. This isn't a guarantee of returns, and nobody teaching you about this trend honestly should ever promise you one. It's a case for paying closer attention to a business model, not a case for blind conviction in a single stock. Before we close, remember the number from a few minutes ago, the 17 consecutive quarters of improving profitability. That number matters because it's the difference between a story investors want to believe and a business that's actually proving it in the numbers, quarter after quarter, without needing a dramatic headline to justify it. Now come back to the question we opened with. Imagine deleting 5 apps and replacing them with one. That's no longer a hypothetical. For millions of people across Southeast Asia, it's simply what a phone is for. 20 years ago, a handful of websites quietly replaced the shopping mall as the center of commerce, and almost nobody realized how big that shift was until it was already finished. 10 years ago, a single app category quietly replaced the taxi industry, and most people treated it as a convenience rather than a fundamental restructuring of an entire industry. Today, one company is attempting something larger than either of those, replacing not one habit, but nearly every financial habit a person has, one layer at a time. Whether this specific company wins that race in the long run is still an open question, and nobody should pretend otherwise. But the idea underneath it, the super app, the consolidation of fragmented digital life into a single trusted platform, is no longer a prediction. It's already happening right now for hundreds of millions of people who never had to be convinced. The real question isn't whether this model works. It's whether the rest of the world is next, and whether you'll have understood the shift before or after the market finally catches up. That's the kind of question this channel exists to help you sit with. Not hype, not certainty, not a promise of quick returns, just a closer, more honest look at the businesses quietly rebuilding the way money and technology move through people's lives. If that's the kind of thinking you want more of, stay close to the market continuum. Every week, we look past the headline and into the business model underneath it, so you see the shift a little earlier than everyone else does. Something is shifting. Most people are still looking at the surface, and you just got a little closer to seeing what's underneath it.